everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com, bringing community to the internet in chocolate and cocoa since 2008. And today, I invited everybody along to join me in an experiment. So every month for members of the Chocolate Life, I host an AMA, an Ask Me Anything video conference call. I send the link to members. It's a Google Meet link, and we get together on the third Sunday of every month. If I'm not traveling, we get together on the third Sunday of every month for an hour and a half of just open conversation. You can ask me questions. I will bring up things that are important to me that's going on in my chocolate life, and just 90 minutes of just informal conversation. Sometimes we get into some very specific questions about the way businesses are run, or specific about roasting or tasting, or many other, quite technical topics. But sometimes it's just, an opportunity to catch up. And it's a lot of fun. I enjoy having these monthly calls with members. But I decided to extend the idea this month. Can I do an AMA live in the Chocolate Life Live format? And so my request to everyone who might be watching today is to let me know in the comments where you're connecting from, where in the world that might be. But if you have any questions about chocolate, ask me anything about cocoa and chocolate. If you have questions about any of the topics that we might have brought up, or I might have brought up in the last couple of episodes, if you want to let me know ideas for what you think might be interesting topics for me to cover in future episodes, anything you'd like, just put it in the comments, and I will get the question asked. I will put it up on screen. I will share it with people, and we can discuss it in the comments, and I will make it happen here. I'm interested in knowing, number one, if it's at all interesting to you as participants in the Chocolate Life live streams, if this AMA format is at all of interest. Whether you like the idea of my responding to questions live on the air about whatever topics, might be of interest to you at any particular time, please let me know. And with that, let's get started. Because what I've done is I do for every single one of my live streams, as well as for the Chocolate Life Live episodes, or the monthly AMA calls, I put together a number of topics that I would like to discuss, so that if there are no particular questions that people want to ask, I can go over them. So I want to remind everybody that, boom, on the right over here, this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life Live, of the Chocolate Life as it exists today. And for every single one of my live streams, I do put together a post which covers what's going on. And it's also the repository of links after the fact. So if there's a topic that is brought up and we go and I mention a resource or something like that, I will post that resource onto this page, as long as it's a link that's accessible on the internet. And the reason why I do it is that so you don't actually have to stop paying attention and go and look to see what the link might be in my browser, and then to go find it yourself, but you can pay attention to what's going on. So here is today's page for the live stream. It's about AMA, Ask Me Anything. It's about innovation and news. And I want to start off with just a fun bit of news and innovation, which is I am a big fan of the cheese bread, which can be found in Ecuador and Brazil and other places throughout South America, as pão de queijo. Pão de queijo. I'm trying to get the Portuguese pronunciation of it down right well. And so I have some of the flours that are used. It's a sweet manioc flour and a sour manioc flour that are used to make pão de queijo. I just came back from Ecuador, where I had the Ecuadorian version, pan de yuca. And I was wondering, because I saw some cocoa powder up in my shelf, I wonder if I could take some cocoa powder and add it to pão de queijo. And the answer is you can absolutely do it. It's really interesting. It works better, I think, with the traditional mild cheese. Although in this particular case, I used a harder aged cheese, which is a little saltier and a little umami-ness, which was really, really quite wonderful. And the other thing that I did while they were warm is I cut them in half, or tore them in half, and then put little pieces of chocolate into the pão de queijo. So a really phenomenal experience. And it's something that if you can get your hands on the manioc flour, which is used, and you've got a recipe, or you can get a mix there are pre-mixes that you can purchase in the store. That experimenting with a cocoa pão de queijo is really, really wonderful, and putting chocolate in it. So this is a chocolate made with Nicaraguan cocoa beans and nibs, and it's milk chocolate. So really, really fabulous. I tried a version of this, which was to put chocolate chips into the cocoa pão de queijo, and it turns out that they were okay as long as the pão de queijo was warm, right? But the moment it got cold and the chocolate chips set up, it was not really nearly as interesting. So if you're going to do something like that, I would recommend that you consume them while they were warm. And then I decided, because I opened up my refrigerator and I had some pesto, I was wondering if I could make a Parmesan and pesto version of a pão de queijo. And I did, and you can, and they're really, really quite wonderful. You have to be careful about over salting. Parmesan can be too salty if you're not careful. But then I also made a pesto pão de queijo caprese. So while they were warm, I put some very thin slices of mozzarella, some very thin slices of tomato, and a fresh basil leaf on top of it, closed it up, let it all go melty. And I can tell you that a Parmesan pesto caprese, a pão de queijo, is a really, really wonderful thing to try. I know it sounds crazy, but I thought, hey, let's talk about a little flavor innovation. These were fun, taking something that is, very, very common, but I don't see a lot of experimentation around the flavors that are associated with a pão de queijo. And so I thought I would have fun doing it. So I want to do a quick shout out to Imran Ahmed, who is connecting from Pakistan, from Ajar and Company. So Imran, thanks very much for connecting here on the Chocolate Life Live. Now from there, I want to go to a bit of news. And I wrote about this on the Chocolate Life, and I wondered about the weirdest chocolate and sportswear tie-in of all time. And that tie-in would be, is it Tony's Chocolonely and Adidas? So believe it or not, you could go to the internet and you could purchase a Tony's branded tracksuit, right? So manufactured by Adidas. And not only could you buy a tracksuit, you could buy T-shirts like chocolate brown with the Adidas and Tony's branding. You could buy slip-ons in various colors, and then you could also buy tennis shoes, sneakers, or trainers, depending on where you are in the world, and with laces in Tony's brand colors. My thinking about this is that I think Tony's, as evidenced also by their recent deal with Ben & Jerry's, which is a division of Unilever, to put Tony's chocolate into Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I think it's a sign of attempting to set up Tony's Chocolonely to go public. That's my sense. But also Adidas has some unfair labor practices that have been associated, that they've been accused of. And so Adidas associating with the Tony's Chocolonely brand could be an example of attempting to greenwash what it is that's going on. So not entirely sure, but I just wanted to let everybody know. Just let me know. If you are a Chocolate Life member, what you can do is you can scroll down to the bottom, and in the comments, let us know what you think about what's going on about the Tony's and Adidas co-branding. Now, from what I can understand, this relationship has ended. And so if you're going to find anything on any one of the stores, it's just remaindered, whatever is left of what was done. The tracksuit top is no longer available. The sneaks are available only in some sizes. You can go to other websites and find things, but with respect to, going and finding a lot of this merchandise, it's not. Thankfully, it appears that this is not a successful tie-in. I can sort of understand why, because I think that remaindered, the tracksuit top at a 3 extra small is $90, which is $80 or $90, which seems very expensive to me. But also there was no indication that any of the money that was spent on any of these items would actually go towards addressing issues associated with child labor in West Africa. So if I'm one of Tony's special friends, I can fly the flag. I can show the colors of the Tonys, but not necessarily that what I would be doing is actually supporting Tony's goal, right? Which is to eradicate illegal child labor and illegal slavery out of their supply chain in West Africa. So Imran has a question. We're producing compound chocolate, but more interested to produce real chocolate. Unfortunately, in our country, it is difficult to find cocoa beans and/or cocoa mass liquor. How can I find small quantities of cocoa mass from any part of the world? And what kind of cocoa mass should I use as a beginner? So, Imran, I can imagine that it is going to be difficult to find either cocoa beans or cocoa mass in your part of the world. Now, the closest country that I'm aware of that produces cocoa beans is India. Specifically down in Kerala and the southern part of the country. I don't know what relationships are right now between Pakistan and India, and whether it might be possible to import some beans across the border. There are some industrial chocolate makers that work in India that produce cocoa liquor, chocolate liquor, which are calling cocoa mass. And so it might be possible to get that from India. Otherwise, I'm trying to think. Trade relations with Turkey. I don't know that beans can be purchased through Turkey. I'm guessing that chocolate liquor can be produced through Turkey. Other places sort of nearby, cocoa is now being grown in China. I don't know that it's huge quantities because it's a novelty. Cocoa from China, it tends to be expensive. But if you have good trade relations with Thailand, for example, or Vietnam, that you might be able to get beans from either Thailand or Vietnam as well. So India has good cocoa beans, whether they come from Kerala or maybe Sri Lanka, is also a cocoa producing origin. These are the places in the region that I would go look at. You might be able to find some of the big industrial chocolate makers that have cocoa mass in a market like Turkey. And so you might be able to get the cocoa mass from Turkey. But otherwise, I'm not sure. And I don't know if it's available in very, very small quantities. So if you wanted 10 or 20 or 50 kilos, not certain exactly how you might do that from Pakistan. But at the moment, it will depend upon trade relations with other countries. One thing that I might ask is, I don't know if Pakistan is at the World Cup this year. I don't think they are, but there might be some people from Pakistan who are attending the World Cup. And so maybe they might be able to bring something back in their luggage for you. I'm just thinking small quantities to experiment with for sure. But I might take a look and see if that might be possible as well. I don't know if that answers your question, Imran. Please let me know if you have something else that you'd like me to talk about, or let me know if any of the ideas seem to be ones that might be plausible, and if not, maybe we can take a look at some other things. Maybe not during the live stream today, but maybe offline. Might be able to talk about that. Yes, I guessed that it was not possible to import from India, given what I know of international relationships between the two countries. But you do have other countries in the region. Sri Lanka is not a part of India. You do have Thailand, you do have Singapore, and you do have Thailand. And Taiwan is a part of China. So depending on who you talk to, Taiwan is a source. China is a source. Mainland China is a source. Sorry for that slip for anybody who's from Taiwan. I apologize for that. But as well as Vietnam. So those are other places that are in the region where it might be possible to do. And I know that there are chocolate manufacturing companies in Turkey. And so perhaps Turkey would be a source of things. Again, I don't know what trade relations are between any of those countries. So I would go take a look at that. So let's go on to the next topic. Again, we're here on the Chocolate Life Live. We're doing my first AMA, Ask Me Anything, in the live stream format. I do this as a monthly call for members, at least when I'm not traveling. I do it as a monthly call for members. And I wanted, because I had the monthly call this past Sunday, I wanted to have an opportunity to do something live as well. So having said that, let's move on to the next thing, which I have set up for today. And that is taking a look at a brand which is really, really influential in the world. So I am sorry for the advertising here. There's no way I can get rid of it. I do have an ad blocker, but when I put the ad blocker up, the site doesn't load properly. So I apologize for all the motion and all the stuff that's going on here. But so Scharfenberger, 1996, John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg founded Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker. I think they founded it beforehand, but this is when they went public, bringing their chocolate in. And they were bought in 2005 by Hershey Artisan Confections, along with Dagoba Chocolate, as well as Joseph Schmidt. They sold, so Hershey Artisan Confections, almost immediately, within a year, closed down Joseph Schmidt. They just weren't in the artisan bond-bound business, even though they called themselves Artisan Confections, but they kept on to both Dagoba and Scharfenberger. Until 2021, when they spun Scharfenberger off privately. So Scharfenberger is a private company for about a year, maybe a little longer. Not that we've heard much about them. At least I haven't heard much about new product launches in that time. But something that came across my desk a couple of weeks ago, which saying that they're rebranding and they've expanded their portfolio and their leadership team. So one of the things that my memory of Scharfenberger branding is that it was very brown and very masculine, right? And so this is apparently what the new branding looks like. I mean, it is in fact, percentage forward, which I think is really, really interesting. Can I get it bigger than this? No, I can't get it bigger than this. It is very, very percentage forward. And they are calling themselves craft. So if you read down here, I will put the link to this in today's post a little bit later. And I'm also going to write, I think, an individual story on this because I think it's an important story all on its own. They are calling themselves craft chocolate, but I think that one of the things that they're missing here, and I think it's one of the fundamentals about what craft chocolate is, that Spencer Hyman of Cocoa Runners and I have been talking about, is that one of the things that craft chocolate makers can do is they can talk about the origin of their cocoa beans. And so there's nothing here that talks about origin of cocoa beans. And so I am not exactly clear about Scharfenberger having started off as the original craft chocolate brand, but having been owned by Hershey Artisan Confections for 15 or so years, spinning themselves off privately, what it means for them to be craft. I also have a question about them, is they're talking about doing something that they call flats. All right, I'm not certain exactly what the flats are, except it sounds like they're for snacking, right? More things. And that makes me think about another Hershey brand called Bark Thins. So Bark Thins was also a part of Hershey at the same time. Scharfenberger, Bark Thins is still owned by Hershey. And I'm kind of wondering if what Scharfenberger is calling flats might have been inspired by what Bark Thins are. Not entirely sure. I would need to go out and spend money on them or go take a look at them in more depth. But I'm curious to know, right? Scharfenberger is the uber craft chocolate brand. It is the original. It is the OG. I mean, everything that we're doing here now is in some respect built on top of what it is that Scharfenberger started in 1996 here in the United States, right? But here they are rebranding and not looking at all like what they look like. And what do we think about Scharfenberger? If anybody's tasted this, please let me know in the comments, or you can put it down in the comment on the page on the Chocolate Life. If you're a member, boom, drop down, put a comments, let me know what you think about Scharfenberger chocolate. If you've tasted any of the new stuff, whether you think it lives up to your memory of what it used to be. I may go look for some and just try it just because I want to see what it's like and sort of give a commentary on it. So, but I'm interested in knowing if anybody here even cares about the history of Scharfenberger and do they think that it's possible to not just rebrand, but to resuscitate the brand. I'm really, really curious in knowing what people think about that. I also want to jump back real quickly. Imran, who says it's not impossible to import from India. What type of cocoa beans should you select? At this point, Imran, you should select anything you can get your hands on. So being able to do any kind of practice with beans is better than not being able to do any kind of practice. What you may want to do is see if you could take some online courses having to do with how you might evaluate those cocoa beans to determine, what the defects are in the cocoa beans. So you can find out if they might be very, very under fermented. You can find out if they're very highly acidic, and things like that. So I would go and take a look. There's an organization here in the United States, the Fine Cocoa and Chocolate Initiative. They might have some video tutorials which would enable you to do part of their cocoa evaluation. They do have a form. They do have some inexpensive equipment that they use, like a popcorn popper, to roast, quote unquote, roast the beans. They use a coffee grinder to be able to make a powder from the beans that you can evaluate. So I would go and see if you could find some relatively inexpensive way to do some sort of a flavor evaluation of the beans, but do it on whatever beans you can get your hands on. Like, don't worry if they're criollos. And as a matter of fact, I would start off with the least expensive beans that you can find, right? So if you're going to be experimenting with things like roasting, doing it with $12 a kilo beans, right? And that may be the only thing you get by the time you ship them to where you are. But doing it with very expensive, for example, Criollo genetics, which requires a much more delicate hand and a better understanding, I think, of roasting profiles than, for example, something which is 100% Forasteros. Maybe coming from West Africa originally, that would be fine. Start out there, right? So start off with the cheapest beans that you can find. Learn to evaluate the beans using some sort of protocol that you can find, right? And don't stress about finding great cocoa beans until you feel comfortable. And this is something comfortable until you feel comfortable in your skills at least evaluating and roasting the beans, and then refining them into something which you find an acceptable flavor. So get to a point where you feel comfortable with that level of skill before you go and spend a lot of money on expensive beans. My experience is if you start off with very expensive beans, you're likely to treat them too delicately. You won't even get close to over roasting them. And you will, in fact, under roast them. And if you under roast them, you're not going to bring out certain quantities of flavors. If you are certain kinds of flavor, certain quality of flavor. If you are working with a less expensive bean, you're less worried about making mistakes. And as I have said in other live streams, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. Right? You need to make mistakes. You need to under roast. You need to over roast. You need to understand what these things taste like. Now, the best thing you could do, I think, is if you could find two different varieties of beans. Maybe they're both Amelinado Forasteros, but one might be from Ghana, one might be from the Ivory Coast. They will be different, or one might be from Ghana, one might be from Cameroon, or you might be able to get beans from, hold on a second, everybody. I need to turn on do not disturb so that I don't get noises in my ear, and you might be able to hear those noises. Anyway, I hope you understand. I mean, if you can have two different varieties of beans, then what you can do is you can perform the same tests on both of them, right? So you could roast them the same way and see the differences between the two, right? If you're going through something like the FCCI protocol, you can treat them the same way and see what the differences are. And I think that, again, this comparative evaluation is going to get you where you want to go faster than starting off with very, very expensive beans. So that's that. You can buy up to 1 ton of cocoa paste. All right. So if what you want to do is you want to start off with cocoa paste, then chances are your options associated with the roast of that paste, so the inherent sort of flavor development and bitterness, is going to be not as much under control as if you started off from beans. So you take the paste, you'd add sugar to it. You might add other ingredients. You could refine it. And now you're starting to play with how much time am I going to do it? Can I blow hot air over it so I can change the flavor development over time. But if you can start with cocoa mass, cocoa paste, and you can get your hands on it, a ton of it is a lot of experimentation. You're not going to be a bean to bar chocolate maker. You're going to start from liquor. There's nothing wrong with that. And as a matter of fact, if you can find a consistent supply where somebody is giving you a paste that, number one, you like, right? And they can give you a consistent flavor profile, it gives you an opportunity to get your product into the market, start playing with it, to be able to provide a product which is probably differentiated from the other chocolate which is on the Pakistan market, which is likely to be commercial. So very high in sugar, very highly processed, and you get an opportunity to do something different. I would play with there. I mean, I would also look to think about flavors and inclusions associated with not just savory dishes, but also that's in your local dessert culture. I don't know much about the dessert of Pakistan. I'm guessing it's not all that different from what I might find in India. So there are some flavors there that I would look at and use them as flavors and inclusions in the chocolate. That might enable you to use less sugar, for example. And I mean, there are lots of really fabulous curry chocolates out there in the world. Maybe if you could, I'm trying to think, so some sort of baked product. I don't know if there's an Indian or Pakistani equivalent of phyllo dough, which could be used as an inclusion for a crunchy element. Lots of things like that I would think about doing, but paste would be a good place to start. Great information possible from China. I don't have any reliable source of cocoa beans from China, unfortunately, because they have just started growing cocoa beans from China in recent years. And from my understanding, the first sales of cocoa beans from China happened within the last year or so. They were sold to someone in Europe. I don't know of anyone who bought them, and they were very expensive compared with other cocoa beans on the market. And I think that's because there weren't very many of those cocoa beans available for purchase, and that it was just such a novelty. Oh, I've got the first cocoa beans coming from China. I'm going to go do something with them. But what I might do, so if you're on the internet and you can, I'm trying to think, you know what? A specialty cocoa bean broker that's associated with a very, very large international company. So, for example, Ecom, I believe, has a division called Cacao Latitudes. I believe it's Ecom has a division called Cacao Latitudes. And so looking at the Cacao Latitudes website, reaching out to them and asking them if they have an ability to bring something from China, they're one of the companies I think that would be able to source from them. Now, they may be able to point you to somebody in China who exports them. I don't know if Cacao Latitudes or Ecom can actually help facilitate getting those cocoa beans from China to Pakistan. It's a really interesting question and a really interesting challenge. I think that eventually the Chinese government will do the amazing job that they always do in promoting these kinds of things. I don't necessarily know that they will be produced under the most environmentally sound concerns. This is an issue that we have with many, many things coming out of China, unfortunately, where the focus is on cost, not necessarily on quality. But that would be a place I would start if you want to find a source for beans from China. A company like Cacao Latitudes, which is associated with a very, very large bean broker, which would be Ecom or Atlantic Cocoa here in the United States. Just a thought. Right. And so with that, I want to remind everybody who's watching or even live or will be participating in the watching this after it's been recorded. We're here at the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. We've been providing community in the worlds of cocoa and chocolate since 2008. And for my members, I've started doing a monthly AMA call. And I decided, because the call was this past Sunday, to see if I could extend the AMA format into the live stream format. If this is something you'd like and you'd like to see me continue doing this, let me know in the comments here, whether you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. Just put it in the comments so that I can see it. If you're a member of the Chocolate Life Live, or the Chocolate Life, excuse me, you can go to the page on the Chocolate Life if you're a member, and you can let me know in the comments what you think. I run the software that I use, which is called StreamYard, in case anybody is interested. I put StreamYard in Chrome in my Chrome browser on the screen of my laptop, and I share another screen, and I use Safari. Right, so I make sure that when I bounce back and forth between the two screens, I don't accidentally pop up hidden tabs and hidden windows. So you may notice that I am not signed into the Chocolate Life in Safari. So if I come here, you'll see up here, I've got this link called Join. If I was actually signed into Safari, it would say Account, which is a reminder, if you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, please click on the Join button. We have a bunch of different levels of support for what it is that I'm doing here, including a free one. There's always a free membership level tier at the Chocolate Life. And if you want to support what it is that I'm doing this holiday season, I got some special offers in consulting and in membership for the 2022 holiday season that you can go take a look at. Of course, listen, I understand, times are pretty rough for a lot of people. Spare cash is difficult to get behind. So please, if what you can do is you can like and share and subscribe, that would be great. If you can join up as a free member, that's also great. Any show of support is appreciated. So, having gone through that, reminding everybody, if you have a question that you'd like to ask me, it's an AMA kind of day, as well as talking about innovation and news. So we talked briefly about some flavor innovation, right? Coco pau de queijo, as well as pesto, caprese pau de queijo. I mean, it sounds weird, really, really, really good. Maybe it's heretical, taking a pau de queijo, but I think that, pau de queijo has this sort of iconic cheese bread, pan de yuca in Ecuador. And I haven't seen a whole lot of people playing around with the basic recipe. And so I'm having fun playing around with the basic recipe for pau de queijo. Taking a look at Tony's Chocolonely pairing up with Adidas, Scharfenberger rebranding, whether it's going to be relevant after 15 years of being owned by Hershey Artisan Confection. And then I want to talk about something which is a lot more serious. I had a conversation about second generation chocolate last Friday. It was the whole live stream was about my being in Venice and talking about second generation chocolate. And as a part of the second generation chocolate movement, one of the things that I proposed at the end of that live stream, and this is going to be, I excerpted that last couple of minutes, and I'm going to be posting it on LinkedIn later today. But what it is that I suggested is that Barry Callebaut use whatever momentum is put together, whatever momentum they can garner behind second generation chocolate to make a fundamental aspect of G2 chocolate for them to meet their commitments under the Harkin-Engel Protocol to end the worst forms of child labor and slavery in the cocoa supply chain, in their cocoa supply chain in West Africa. In part because, the president of the World Cocoa Foundation is the same person as the CEO, Barry Callebaut. And while he is the president of the World Cocoa Foundation, he's probably the single most powerful political figure in cocoa and chocolate today. And so perhaps he has the clout to be able to go do this. So I've been looking at a bunch of related news around what Big Chocolate is doing. So the first one of these, this is not new news, right? This bit of news was announced originally a little over a year ago in the trade press. And I need to thank Neil Barston of Confectionery Production News, who pointed this out to me on LinkedIn, that this is something that they covered last year, right? But what struck me about this is that this is now in the Times of London. So it's gone from something that the trade press has carried about to something that the mainstream press is talking about. And that is that Nestle is offering $1 billion to keep children out of the chocolate trade. So Nestle is saying, basically, we're giving up on the idea that we can do fundamental reform of the way in which cacao is priced. Right? So if we can't actually change the pricing mechanism for cocoa, right, which I understand, very, very complicated kind of mechanism, what we can do is we can rely on charity. We'll just give little handouts to cocoa farmers so that they don't have to resort to using their children and slaves and third parties as unpaid and in some cases forced labor, right? So let's just pay them directly. And so what they've done is they've earmarked £1 billion over the course of the next 7 years. So it sounds like they've offered £1 billion, but it turns out it's 140 million pounds a year. And they want to give the equivalent of about $500 per year to some of these farmers. Now, it turns out that $500 means more than $1 a day. And that $1 a day compared to what cocoa farmers are currently using is significant, right? It could essentially, in some cases, almost double their income from the cocoa part of their farming business, or in some cases, more than double that. And so that might be enough so that they can enable or allow their children to go to school every day. We don't have to pull them out of school in order to work in the family business. But so number one, you look at this headline and you go, man, £1 billion, that sounds like a lot of money. You need to compare it, right, against the fact that Nestle globally last year reported earnings of, well, I actually, take a look. Here it is, full year results. I've got it here. So for 2021, across the entire spectrum of all of Nestle, they earned 87 billion, Swiss francs, about 75 million pounds. I did the conversion yesterday. So 75 million pounds. And they recorded operating profits of about 17.4%. So I did do a look and said, what is 140 million over 75 billion? And it turns out it's less than 0.2%. So when it comes to the actual commitment, £1 billion sounds like a lot, but it's less than 0.2% of profit, right? And that's probably gross profit, not net profit. I'm not entirely certain. I didn't do that deep a dive into how Nestle is reporting its returns, but it says, they can invest this money. And it turns out if they give this money through an NGO, then they can take it as a tax write-off. And so it doesn't have as much of either a top line or bottom line effect on terms of either operating cost or operating profits. But it sounds like a lot. But we need to look at it in context. And that's one of the things that Neil pointed out to me in Neil Barston. And if we go to this post on the Chocolate Life, you'll see that I mentioned, oh no, I thought that, you know what, I haven't updated this yet. I need to go update it, so excuse me. In any event, take a look at what it is going on. And this is where I think that the overlap between what I saw in Venice at the G2 launch and all of these launch is that the general press, this is, again, the Times of London, the general press really doesn't have an understanding of what the complexities of cocoa are like and the history of the why cocoa farmers are in the place that they're in right now. And so they're reporting it as a sort of top line basis, right? And I think that the Times of London actually goes and does some really, really interesting interviews. For example, here, for the last 20 years, a lot of the business was window dressing. They spoke with somebody at the Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam I've visited the Royal Tropical Institute, the building, one of the great buildings, to hold a chocolate festival, right? And they, that I've ever been in, and this says it's an independent organization that studied Nestle, Mars, Tony's, Chocolonely, and Lindt. They put nice pictures on the website. The companies are much more scrutinized by NGOs and social media, right? And saying you can't get away with a story that doesn't hold, right? But that's unusual for a mainstream media outlet to go and make that sort of criticism, to do that kind of research and try to get a better understanding of what in fact it is that's going on, right? So it says, having introduced the scheme in January, again, earlier this year, for 10,000 farming families in the Ivory Coast. Keep in mind that there are something like 2.5 million farming families in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. With respect to the illegal child labor, Cote d'Ivoire is probably a good first choice, but they're talking about 10,000 families. They're going to give them up to $500 a year if they send their children to school and adopt other sustainable practices. So good for them. It potentially doubling their income from cocoa. Absolutely a good thing. And it would release the first products produced solely from the scheme, a Kit Kat range, next year. Now, because Kit Kats are produced in the United States under license by Hershey, I don't necessarily know that we'll see these Kit Kats in the United States next year. It would be interesting to see. They said that the key driver of child labor is poverty. That's perhaps true. But why are cocoa farmers in poverty? Paying the farmer this way doesn't address any of the underlying challenges associated with alleviating poverty. This is charity, right? It is not alleviating the fundamental underlying contributors to poverty. The way to do that is to systematically change the way cocoa is priced, right? And to ensure that when cocoa is priced, it is priced properly, right? And that this money gets to the farmer at the farm gate. So how do we go and double the farmer's income based on the amount of cocoa they're currently growing, right? How do we get them this extra $500 a year, right? Directly to them through the activities that they're already doing, not through charity. Because in 2030, Nestle may decide that it doesn't want to re-up this program, right? The rest of the industry that's doing these things may decide that they don't want to re-up these programs. So it's a challenge. As long as the scheme is in place, it will be good for some small percentage of farmers, The National Opinion Research Council, I believe, is NORC, out of the University of Chicago, said there are 1.5 million children in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana collectively, which are involved in some form of illegal child labor in those two countries. And these are 10,000 farming families out of all the families, maybe 2.5 million in those two countries. So it's perhaps a part of a solution, but I think directly paying farmers this way might be good for PR purposes, might be good for press purposes, but it does absolutely nothing in terms of addressing the fundamental factors that contribute to poverty in the first place. I mean, when we look at, for example, Mali and Burkina Faso, what we might look at climate change, which is having a huge effect on farming and the ability of people in those two countries to be able to feed themselves, right? So yes, it's poverty, but poverty how, right? What are the contributing factors to that poverty? And just cash payments is not the way to go about doing it, in my opinion. If you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments. If you're watching this, put it in the comments. Let me know what you think. If you're watching this and you can put something in the comments, please, and even if you don't have a question, just please let me know who you are and where you're connecting from. I would love to be able to get you up on screen and acknowledge the fact that you're participating in the live stream today. But this is interesting. This is for me, right, where the work that I do, I try very, very hard to understand some of the underlying numbers. And so being able to go take a look at this 1 billion commitment over 7 years, right, is important to know, because it seems like a lot of money, And maybe $140 million a year is a lot of money, but it's not like $1 billion a year. And certainly, Nestle as a company can afford to do this. But it's interesting is, could it afford to do something like this in its sugar supply chain? Could it afford to do something like this in other areas of their supply chains for which there might be similar kinds of problems? I don't know the answer to that question. Cocoa, for some reason, is front of mind. It seems to be one of the first places that people go when they think about these things for one reason or another. But it's one example of where these inequities exist. So surprise, surprise, this is something that Nestle announced last January. And recently, Mondelez announced, this was last month, that it's going to pledge $600 million. So as African states snub the cocoa talks. So again, what Mondelez is going to do is it's agreed to invest another $600 million in its ChocolateLife program. So if you are a farmer in a country where ChocolateLife is a thing, right? That what happens is Mondelez is going to has pledged to invest another $600 million, but only in its own plan, not to solve the problem globally, but only to solve the problem for them. And again, this $600 million, should be noted, is between now and 2030. One of the reasons why this is important, and this cocoa talks here, is the 2022 World Cocoa Foundation partnership meeting, which was held in Brussels in October, is that they're basically saying we are not going to be able to meet our commitments to the Harkin-Engel protocol, which is one of the reasons why the World Cocoa Foundation was founded in the first place. We're going to kick the bucket down the road. There's a deadline in 2025 to reduce this illegal labor by 70% across the board in West Africa. What they're saying is we're not going to be able to do this, so we're going to invest money to address the problem on our own, selfishly, because there's legislation coming up from the EU and other countries that basically says you're going to need to be able to certify that your supply chains are in fact child labor free. So rather than saying we have a commitment to the world to solve this problem, and they may say, no, we don't have a commitment to the world. As a corporation, we only have a commitment to our shareholders, and therefore we're only going to invest in things that make sense for our shareholders. This is what they've done. Now, I'm sorry that Bloomberg has got a paywall, and so I didn't set up an account to go behind the paywall. But keep in mind that this is something that Mondelez is also doing, and we may see between now and 2025 other members of Big Chocolate, other big companies which are members and partners in the World Cocoa Foundation may make similar kinds of announcements, basically signaling beforehand that they're not even going to try seriously to meet their voluntary commitments under Harkin-Engel that they have been pushing down the road for 20 years. They're going to push it down the road for another 5 years. So for me, what I do is I don't buy anything Cadbury, right? I look at Mondelez and I try to find, Mondelez owns Kraft. And so what does that mean? I don't buy Kraft macaroni. Not that I would buy Kraft macaroni and cheese anyway. It's a hyper-processed food. I'm not into buying hyper-processed food. If I'm going to have mac and cheese, I'm going to buy macaroni and I'm going to melt cheese on it. But I'm going to not support any Mondelez brand, Kraft being one of them. Now, I'm not, Cadbury, right, is owned by Kraft, and so I'm not going to support them. And so this is what I can do, as well as trying to make my thoughts known and see if you agree with me, or if you don't agree with me. Let me know if you think I'm right, I think I'm wrong. There's some other aspect of this I may not have thought of, another way to go about thinking about it and talking about it. Please let me know what it is that you think. I want to say hello to Lynn Bishop, who's coming from Panama, who says, I appreciate the discussion of the topic. The disconnect between the farmer and the consumer is wide, and not many are willing to take the time to bring equity. Ashley, I'm absolutely right. And perhaps, Lynn, this is a question for you. It's certainly something that weighs on my mind. So, like, I was listening to something at the moment about the UK. And there is going to be a drop in between 2022 and 2023 of 7% in disposable income. I don't know what the numbers are in the United States. It just happened over here this morning that the drop was going to be 7% in the UK. And for political reasons, it's not good for the Conservative Party and the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, because people are hurting. And they have less disposable income. And so one of the questions, right, that I have about this is, hey, if, to what extent are you willing to give up cheap chocolate? I'm not certain how many people here eat cheap chocolate in the first place. I do have to admit it was Halloween and there was a basket of miniatures, and I did have my annual Butterfinger miniature. Once a year. It is a secret chocolate obsession from my childhood. It's the once a year around Thanksgiving, not around Halloween, where I indulge in it. But I'm lucky. I get this chocolate. I'm around this chocolate. I have this chocolate. But Lynn, perhaps when you talk about equity, right? Is it not just the time to bring equity, but it is the disposable income, right? So if you are really starting to feel stretched, right, in terms of, oh my gosh, I remember before going to Ecuador in October, that I thought I could buy eggs for upper $3 a dozen here in New York. And now I find that most of the eggs are somewhere between $4.50 and $6 a dozen. I could buy milk at, I thought, like, upper sometimes $3.99, but usually mid $4 for a half-gallon organic milk. And now it's hard to find for less than $7 a gallon in a bunch of places. So when I'm, faced with making those kinds of choices on a regular basis, and I do a lot more careful shopping, like I've got a range of, fortunately, about half a dozen different grocery stores within walking distance, that what I can do is I can do a lot of price comparison. Right. But I find myself spending a lot more time shopping because I have less disposable income to spend on these things. I'm not happy that I'm in a place where I need to worry about that. But that's just what my circumstances are at the moment. And I'm wondering to what extent other people are seeing this same pinch in their circumstances, and whether or not they will say, no, right, I'm willing to spend a lot extra money on my chocolate purchases to make sure that the farmers are in fact paid well. It's just an interesting question. If anybody's got an answer to that, please let me know, and I'll be able to. Sorry about that. I'm just interested in knowing, where other people are in there, and to remind everybody, we're here on the Chocolate Life Live. We've got about 5 minutes left before the end of the hour, and we've been doing an AMA, Ask Me Anything, focusing on innovation and news, questions from the participants in a bunch of different areas having to do with equity and social justice, around cocoa farming, just weird product introductions, and some having fun playing with flavors in Palo de Queijo, which I really, really love. So what else have I got? Oh, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about innovation, right? Right. And so there's a magazine, a publication called Candy Industry. And I searched on the word innovation, and things which were tagged as innovation or had innovation in the title or article within the last 6 months. And so I just wondered, what are the trade press writing about when they think about innovation? So innovation in gummy bears. Ooh, so we have push pop gummy poppets. Okay. In interactive refillable containers. So gummies in a Pez dispenser or something like that. I don't know if that's I don't know how innovative that is. Doesn't strike me as being particularly innovative. Mars breaks ground on an innovation hub. So they're spending money, right, on a lab facility for 2022. Versatility of the gummy format is one of the category's key drivers in terms of growth, and texture and flavor innovation in not chocolate chewy candies. Again, I'm not necessarily a candy guy, but finding more ways to sell people sugar doesn't strike me as working on innovation for good. So innovation spurs sales increases for truffles and filled chocolates, right? I didn't look at that. Again, Ferrero, not to be outdone by Mars and Wrigley, is opening an innovation center in Chicago. So we have two innovation centers opening up in Chicago this year. Barry Callebaut establishes a farm of the future. Interestingly enough, this is in the Guayas region, the Guayas province, around Sarasita, which is where I was when I was in Ecuador. So it's a dry forest. I showed people some pictures of that. So the farm of the future. So Barry Callebaut has decided that it is going to help decide the future of cocoa farming in Ecuador. In the rest of the world, I don't know the answer to that question. But Corbion, I have no idea who they are. They're opening a customer support and innovation center. What's driving candy innovation? You can subscribe to this magazine at no charge if what it is you're interested in looking at in terms of innovation. And the reason why I'm thinking about innovation is I'm thinking about G2 chocolate, second generation chocolate. What does that mean in terms of for Barry Callebaut? Number one, second generation chocolate innovation is making 2-ingredient chocolates and 3-ingredient milk chocolates, 2-ingredient dark chocolates, 3-ingredient milk chocolate. And in order to be able to deliver that to the market, I don't think those are innovations per se, right? Because the craft chocolate world has been doing that for at least 15 years. But I think it's interesting with respect to industrial chocolate. And Callebaut does ask some interesting questions from an innovation perspective. I don't necessarily know that they originated the questions. I don't necessarily know that they originated all of the research upon which these quote unquote innovations are based, but they have the resources to go say, oh, why does chocolate need to be brown? Right? And over the course of the years, introduced ruby chocolate, irrespective of what we think is ruby. It's an interesting question. Why does chocolate have to be brown? Right? When we think about whole fruit, it's okay, why are we only interested in beans? Right? Why there are other things. Again, Callebaut is not the first person to try to do anything with the juice or the pulp. They're not the first people to do anything with the pod, right? But they have the resources to be able to figure out how to scale this up to industrial levels of production. Interesting. So just second generation chocolate is how do we make a 2-ingredient chocolate? Again, milk dark chocolate. Again, it's not their idea, right? But in order to do it, what they needed to do is they needed to go all the way back to the farm and control fermentation, right? So what they can do is they can make sure there are no defects in the beans that they would normally over roast and add a lot of sugar and do other things in processing in order to cover up, right? So innovation when it comes to industrial manufacturers, not necessarily introduce innovation for what we in the craft chocolate market know about. These are things that we've been able to have and enjoy for at least 10 to 15 years. So Lynn, response, thank you very much. It seems to me that as prices rise around the world, people are choosing the things that are important to them and letting the extra fall away. When it comes to disposable income, I would agree with you. Once the basics are taken care of, right? So if I have money left over, and this is where I think the crunch on disposable income is going to be interesting. Fortunately, gas prices have come down a lot here in the United States, and almost everything depends on gasoline in one form or another, either or petrochemicals. Fertilizer production, transportation, all depends upon these kinds of energy. And so when energy prices are high, things get squeezed. But I do agree with you, Lynn, that with the disposable income we have, we're going to be much more careful in determining how we spend that money. So it's a great observation. I think it's a great way for people to think about it, to be much more careful than they already are, right? In terms of where they're signaling about what's important to them with the purchases that they actually make. So I wanted to also go to another trade magazine, Kennedy's Confections. Again, I believe you can sign up for this for free if you're in the business. Again, just all this advertising. I'm not a big fan of all this advertising. But what do they think of as innovation, right? So number one is, we talked about this last Friday, bee-free honey. So this is a bioidentical honey. I don't think it's a good idea. I'd rather have the money spent on this development spent on actually supporting real hives and keeping bee populations, because there's more to honeybees than honey. It has to do with their role as pollinators. And I think that using this research not to say, well, we're going to lose honey. If we lose bees, we lose a lot more than honey. So I think this is a bad example, and not the kind of innovation I think that needs to be rewarded with any kind of publicity at all, because I don't think it's an example of good innovation, right? So expansions of a sweetener portfolio. Oh, Mars is going to remove the least popular chocolate from their celebrations tubs. Yay, I guess, right? So this is an interesting bit of news. Barry Callebaut, not they achieve strong growth in sales forecast for 21-22, but they're the largest chocolate factory in the world, which was closed down due to salmonella, I believe, in lecithin that they were using, actually is operating at normal capacity. So, I mean, that's not innovation, but I think it's an interesting bit of news that even the world's largest chocolate maker, right, who has really, really strong protocols in place around topics in food safety, can have a problem that actually shuts down completely large parts of the largest factory in the world. And so, again, when we think about innovation, when we think about news, we need to realize that this news and this innovation exists in a context, and this context is always from the company's perspective. So this is important from Barry Callebaut's perspective, and this is important from Mondelez's perspective, and this is important from Nestle's perspective, right? But we need to understand why they're making these claims. What is it they're trying to do? And if what they're doing is they're trying to distract us, they're playing, pay no attention to what's going on behind this curtain over here, or what's happening on a cocoa farm and whatever. We're going to put this bright, shiny thing up here. And what we want people to do is we want people to pay attention to this bright, shiny thing, right? We need to understand what's going on, right, for all of that. And that's why I wanted to highlight the stories that I highlighted today. And we're at the end of the hour. We're a couple of minutes over. What I would like to say is, everybody, thank you very much for joining me here. If there was something you wanted to say or participate in, you can throw it here in the comments over the course of the next couple of days, whether you're at YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. If you're a Chocolate Life member, you can go down and add comments on every single one of these pages. And so please go to the Chocolate Life. You can learn more about today's live stream on this page. You can go learn about all of the live streams here on the calendar. So I have not only a list of upcoming live streams, things I'm working on, but here's a link to every single one of the now 68 live streams. And we just hit our 1-year anniversary on Saturday. So this past Saturday, the 19th of November, I believe, was the 1-year anniversary of the first Chocolate Life live stream last year. So I'm committed to doing this for the next year. So there should be another roughly 100 episodes or so. Yay, surpassing my Clubhouse total. That's my goal. I want to get to at least 143, which was the Clubhouse total. And then we'll figure out how I feel about going forward. I am going to be doing a live stream this coming Friday. This coming Friday is the 25th here in the United States. It's the 25th in most of the world this coming Friday. Or it's always, no matter where you are in the world, it's Friday and the 25th. But on the 25th, it may be the 26th in some places. But in any event, it's the day after Thanksgiving. I will be doing a live stream this coming Friday. Not certain what the topic is. If you have an idea for a topic you'd like me to cover, whether on this coming Friday's live stream or any future live stream, put it in the comments, send it to me, let me know what interests you. But in the meantime, what I want to do is remind everybody, as I remind everybody at the end of every single one of these live streams, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Cheers, everyone.